how did Vector get to the prison when he was in Mars? At the end of Despicable Me 4, we see Vector right there, but it doesn't make any sense because he's supposed to be in Mars. How did he get back to Earth? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about here today. The last time we saw Vector was in a complete adventure in Mars with the Minions, because he was mooned in the beginning, but then he was taken to Mars on the adventure, but then he stayed on Mars, and eventually he was supposed to be there forever. How is he back? Let's focus on the journey of Vector from Mars to Earth. How did he get back to Earth? How was he caught again and locked up and eventually sent to the place that we see at the end of Despicable Me 4 when Gru goes to the jail to visit Maxime, and then he makes a little dance with Maxime and we see all the villains including Vector when he's supposed to be on Mars again. They never gave us any explanation to this, and they never showed us how he got there in the first place. But there are a lot of clues and definite explanations on how he really got back to Earth, and it's really funny and interesting. So without further ado, let's see Vector's journey from Mars to Earth. Let's go. So in the first Despicable Me movie in 2010, we see that Gru defeats Vector by actually sending him to the moon. And at the end of the scene and at the end of the movie, we see that Vector is looking at Earth really mad because he really didn't expect to get mooned per se. And that's exactly what happened. But after this and the multiple Despicable Me movies that were released, many people started questioning the fate of Vector. And then Illumination Studios in 2023 released a short film called Mooned that actually shows us what happened to Vector after the 2010 movie. And it's a very funny short film where we see the Minions and Vector stranded on the moon, not knowing what's going on, and because Vector doesn't speak Minion and Minions don't speak human language, they were not able to communicate with each other. But we see that Vector tried really hard to get out of the moon and go back to Earth by using his villain capabilities and everything he had at hand. But at the end, he took some rockets and tried to propel himself back to Earth, but he did it in such a way that he was literally behind a rocket ship that was sending the Minions to Earth. So he clashed right into it, and instead of going to Earth, he ended up in none other than Mars. And then a little Martian comes in and tries to help him, but he doesn't speak Martian too, so he ignores him because he's mad. But we actually see that the Minions are stuck on Mars too, and they leave right for Earth with the Martian, and Vector stays in Mars alone. But then the next project of Illumination Studios is Despicable Me 4, where we see Vector coming back at the end of the movie, where we see him dancing in the prison with all the other villains like El Macho and all the other ones. So what happened during that time in between when Vector was in Mars to when Vector is now literally on a prison cell on Earth, that when Gru goes to visit him, he's there dancing with all the other villains and having a good time? What happened? Well, this is the explanation. As we know, Vector is very smart. He's definitely the smartest villain out of all the Despicable Me franchise and even the Minions, because in the Minions we also have villains that come up and are very smart, but they don't really get to the level of Vector. That's why he's the most loved villain of the whole franchise. And this is shown in the actual short and at the end of Despicable Me. On the short, when we see that he's on the moon, he tries to do multiple things to get back to Earth. He tries rockets, he has his glasses that he scans everything with, and he does a lot of things with, and he is very smart on knowing how to get back to Earth. And he actually does it. The problem with Vector is that he cannot keep up with his success. He always has to do something wrong at the end, like he did on the moon short, because he had already gotten to the point of going back to Earth. But he did it too early, and he ended up crashing with the Minions rocket ship. Knowing this, knowing that Vector has the capability, the mindset, and all the possibilities in his body to do something of this capability, really shows us that he could have easily gone back to Earth. Now, let's go back to the ending of the moon short, where we see that Vector has no clothes whatsoever. And this was obviously done by the studio to show us that this time he's never gonna go back to Earth because he has no clothes and he has no equipment with which to go back to Earth with. Unlike when he was on the moon, when he had all of these gadgets. But in Moon, at the end of the shorts, we see an alien come to Vector. And like I said before, Vector completely ignores the guy because first of all, he doesn't know the language that the alien is speaking, but second of all, the reason why he's doing this is because he's very angry at the fact that he was this close to going back to Earth, but he couldn't. Now, the alien is the key to go back to Earth, because the alien, as we see at the end of the short, has a spaceship that carries the Minions back to Earth. Supposedly. Why? Because we don't see the end of this. We are not really shown how this whole thing ends. The short ends right with the minions and the alien leaving, but we don't see them actually picking up Vector with them. So this is actually how the explanation of how Vector got back to Earth. This time, he really didn't use all the power and all of the gadgets that he had on the moon to go back to Earth. As we see in Despicable Me, Vector is really kind inside. The only problem with Vector is that he's really fixated on the fact that he wants to be the best villain ever. But Gru obviously takes his spot all the time. But he really isn't a bad person. He really doesn't want to do harm to anybody. We see this in the movie. So we know that Vector actually has the capacity to resonate, to sympathize, and sit down and be like, okay. But most of it all, play it cool, because as we know, he is very smart. So what happened is that Vector played it smart this time and didn't want to be this aggressive and negative villain that wanted to take over the Earth, because the minions and the alien were not going to allow this, and they were not going to help him out if he did this. But what if he showed them that he was a good person? And this is exactly what he did. He talked to the aliens, he talked to the minions, even though they didn't know both languages. He used to speak to them with sign languages, giving them gifts, helping them out to find something to eat, and all of that stuff, and really showing them that he really is a good person, and the only problem that he had was with Gru, not with anybody else but Gru. So somehow, in some way, he really was able to convince the aliens and the minions, but to a larger extent, the alien, because the alien is the one who has the capability of going back to Earth with his spaceship, and he really made sure that they knew that he was actually a good guy, and they took him with them inside the spaceship, and they went back to Earth. Now, the funny thing about all of this here is that at the end of the Despicable Me 4 movie, we see that he's in prison. He's not outside coming back to hunt Gru or anything else. He's back in prison, and how did this happen if he went back to Earth? How did he get caught again? Well, it's very simple. Vector is always going to try to go back to Gru, and he's always going to try to become a villain. So after convincing the aliens and the minions that he was a good person, and he went back to Earth, he went back to Earth to take over Earth and become the best villain again. But this time, he was not going to have it that easy, because everyone knew who Vector was from the first movie, and the alien itself was not going to allow this, because he initially said he was a good person, and now he was doing all of these things that contradict his actual statement of being a good person. So essentially, after Vector did all of this, there was three main things that could have happened that really got him locked up back again. One is that the alien knew about all of this and he gave him up to the police. Second, Vector actually tried to become the best villain again, and he went back for Gru, but Gru was too busy fighting Maxime and El Macho and all the other villains, because we really don't know the timeline of Moon. We really don't know how long it happens after the first movie. But Vector is too busy with all of these new villains that are coming up and Gru is fighting against, so he tries to go back and become the villain, but he gets arrested, and of course the police knows who he is, and he gets locked up in prison. And the third one, and the most probable one, is that Gru knew about this, but we were not shown this in the movie or any short, and he was the one who actually caught Vector again, but this time it was easy because he did it once. So he did it again, he caught him, and he locked him up himself, really making the whole town very safe, because we know that Vector is actually a nuisance and a whole problem for the city if he becomes a villain again. And this is why at the end of Despicable Me 4, we see Vector dancing in the prison.